Namaste, Vadakkam. Today we have a very special guest in this program of Organiser Weekly. In this conversation, we have a person who is basically an engineer, a logistic consultant, who has worked on maritime history and shipbuilding industry for a long time, and then suddenly became an author, and today he is one of the most celebrated social media person in Tamil Nadu, who speaks very articulately and boldly about the phenomena called Dravidianism. So, friends, let me introduce to our special guest, Shri Prabhakaran today.
Namaste, Ji.
Namaste, Vadakkam. Sir, let us start about this journey first.
Yes.
And then we will come to the actual topic.
Okay, right.
So, how come an engineer to, a person whose views are, considered socially, politically, culturally so important? This journey from a, engineer, logistic consultant to author and, a political analyst and articulate, a prominent voice in social media. How would you explain this journey?
The simple way to explain is destiny. I can give so many reasons, but the true reason is destiny. So I did my engineering in Chennai, the College of Engineering, Gindi. And thereafter I joined the Chennai port as assistant traffic manager. And then I rose in ranks. During that time, I was deputed to what is today known as the Indian Maritime University. Then it was called National Institute of Port Management. From the port to an academic institution, what was in itself a big shift, because that gave me a lot of free time to read. So when you read, first of course you read only articles or books related to your own subjects. But one thing leads to another. So at that time, this National Institute of Port Management had a huge volume of encyclopedias, various encyclopedias. So that enriched my knowledge about European history, world history. And thereafter, I had the opportunity. Then I left the government, central government services. I joined the private shipping companies, which gave me an opportunity to travel around the world. I worked in Korea, Dubai. So you see a lot of culture. So I'm a curious person by nature. So when I see, when I was working in Korea, some of the phrases and the syntaxes they use was almost like Tamil. For example, Ullava, it means literally come inside in Tamil. There it means come upstairs. Amma is Amma. There are so many syntaxes. I am talking about all this happened during 89, 90, 91. Then I was transferred to Dubai. Thereafter, since 2000, I am on independent. I do my own business in one category of shipping called chartering. Yeah. So this has been my professional journey. So along with this professional journey, when you are a curious person, when you come across so many diverse factors, you do some little research on that. For example, when I was working as the NIPM, I used to go to all ports to train the port officers. So whenever I go to a port, I visit the historical places in and around that port. When I go to Mumbai or Navasheva, I go to Ajanta, Ellora, Ahmedabad. I've been to the Bibika, Makbara, Shirdi Sai Baba temple. So that time the 10 major ports. So I visited all the ports, spent a lot of time there. You get a bird's eye view picture of Bharat. That is equally important. Going around the world is one thing, but going around your own country is even more important and exhilarating. So this made me a nationalist right from my formative period. And then I started reading Tamil literature. I wanted to read it in the original form without any assistance. So I read the Sangam literature. It was a very fascinating journey. It took me almost 6 months non-stop reading in the nights after my office hours. So that put me, so that was in totally different view compared to the narrative of history which was prevalent in schools and colleges at that time. As a student, what we were taught and what was taught to my own children, that was not in sync with either the Sangam literature or what I saw pan-India or what I saw globally. Then I thought, okay, I should put something into writing. So, my very close friend is a publisher. So, he asked me to write a book on logistics in Tamil. So, that was a well received book. Then I myself was convinced that I have something spirit of writing. Then I wrote a book called about the origin of Dravidian and Aryans. So, this I presented as a paper in the Chemmoli conference in Coimbatore.
It was a
World Tamil Conference. Yes, World Tamil Conference. But it was not conducted by the World Tamil Conference organization. It was just conducted by Mr. Karunanidhi. So technically it is not. But outwardly it is propagated to, or touted to be a World Tamil Conference. There I presented an 8-page article saying that Tamils are not native to this land. They came from Sumeria, that is modern day Iraq. And the Aryans, they also came from the same place, but they came by land route, whereas the Tamils came by sea route. So this is the only difference. So that is how you see all the diversity between the North Indians and the South Indian, but they are the children of the same parents or same ancestors. This was my conclusion, and this article was not allowed to be read. There was a scuffle, so I couldn't complete my reading of that article. But that emboldened me. So my friend requested me to write this as a book. When I wrote this as a book in 2012, this was much well received, and even today it is one of the bestseller for the publisher. So this is in a nutshell about my starting journey.
Now, so you have delved into a most controversial subject of modern India that shaped about the so-called idea of India. You know, who consider India to be born just in recent times. That is the Aryan Invasion theory.
Correct.
And this ethnic differences about Aryan and Dravidian, but you refuted that very strongly.
Yes.
So, what is your take on this? Because historical, this is a popular perception.
Correct.
And even people, many of Indian freedom fighters had to accept directly or indirectly, okay, Aryans came from outside.
Correct.
And the logical corollary was the Dravidians who were original inhabitants of this land were pushed down the south.
Yes.
And that's how we always perceive this.
Correct.
I have my own take, of course.
Right.
This is more to do with the reach of Islamic invasion.
Right.
North saw more destruction and more earlier colonization in the Islamic period. Here till Vijayanagara there was very much rich cultural heritage, and that's why the impact is very less compared to the north. So that's why there is a differentiation. But what is your take about this so-called Aryan invasion theory and two ethnicities at loggerheads, and that's why we find it very difficult to India as a nation in the making.
Correct.
That kind of construction given by the British.
Correct. See here, I wanted to continue my discussion with a caveat, saying that anybody who is curious about this Aryan invasion theory, he considers himself as an expert. So I don't want to fight with those people, but I present my evidences for the readers to accept or reject. So first, let me talk about my own people, the Tamils. They say that we were the autochthons of this land. We were born, we originated in this land, and we migrated elsewhere. We built the pyramids, we built this, that, everything around the world. But you look at the monuments, historical monuments in Tamil Nadu, you don't see any great monument before the Pallava era. That is about 6th century AD. So does it mean that there was no people living here, or why did they not build that time? And immediately after the Pallava era, there is a big spurt in the construction. So suddenly in the matter of 300 years, you see around at least 2,000-3,000 temples, all of made of granite. Not an easy material to work with. So this is a mystery. How did this sudden sprouting of monuments happen? But there was not even a semblance of a small structure before to the Pallava era. So why is this? So then naturally, I can cite so many things in the book, but since this is a video discussion, I just restrict with this one thing. And secondly, our language, the semantics and the syntaxes in the language, there is a problem. See, the throne, the king's throne is called Aryana, Aryasana, which means Simhasana. Simhasana. But there was no lion south of Gir forest. So how did people come to know about lion? But they have so many songs, it is mentioned in our literature. So where did lion come from? So they must have had some prior knowledge about the lion because they have lived in certain places where there were lions. And look at our oldest text called Tolkapiyam, which is even older than that Sangam text. So that Tolkapiyam talks about camel. So we have not heard about camel, at least in South India. Even today it is a rarity. So how did all this happen? Then you have to accept the theory that there is a truncated history of Tamils. So then the local people, they came up with in the late 19th century, there were many scholars, but most of them were linguistic scholars, not anthropologists or geologists, or they did not have any science background. They were basically academicians who said, one of them said, okay, there was a landmass connecting Africa and India. They called it Lemuria. And this was propounded by William Wagner when he found a fossil of one of the Yule lemur in Nilgiris, and the same one in Madagascar, but not elsewhere. But then the continental drift theory shattered that. So when India was once upon a time, geologically speaking, about 64 million years ago, was attached to African plate, and Indian plate detached, and the Madagascar became an island. So Indian plate moved upwards and hit the Asian plate, and the edges of the plate was folded up, which created Himalayas. Then some other theory was put forward saying that there was a landmass south of Cape Comorin, so which went down below the sea and the people migrated here. So the same plate tectonic theory negates that. So this plate is about 100 kilometers thickness. So your Himalayas or the oceans, they are all on top of the plate, at the top of a land. So land cannot go into the sea. Rather, it is the sea that is on top of the land. So if you accept the science of plate tectology, then their theory of the Comoric Kandam, that is either Lemuria or the landmass south of Cape Comorin, is a myth. But we also have the truncated history which needs an explanation. So then I say Tamils have come from elsewhere, not from these two places, elsewhere. There is a lead given in one of our own literature known as Silappatikaram, which talks about the land which had two rivers. One is called Kumariyaru, one is called Pahruli. And there was also a mountain called Kumari. To cut the long story short, I zoom into Iraq. You have Euphrates and Tigris. As I say, Euphrates is Pahruli and Tigris is Kumariyaru, and Taurus mountain is the Kumari hills. And then you have the Sumerian civilization. So I claim that Sumers are the Tamils. So when they were hit by a huge tsunami where the seawater came into Tigris river for almost 600 kilometers inside, so spoiling all their agriculture. So then they have to find a new land. So they decide, it is written in the Sumerian text, in an epic called Epic of Gilgamesh. You will be surprised that they talk about the Ark of Noah, which is in the Bible, but it is first time it is mentioned in Sumerian literature, which is 2000 years before Christ, date-wise. So there they say they originate from this place and go to a place called Dilmun. Leave it at that. Then you take your Macha Puranam. It says it is from a place called Kritamala, and it comes to southern part of India. And the Machapurana is very clear, saying that it rests on the Malayalam hills on the eastern side. So one epic in Sumeria, it gives you the starting point, and another epic in India, Machapuranam, gives you the finishing point. When you connect these two dots, you get a theory that says, okay, Tamils came from Iraq to South India. So if somebody wants to pounce on me by watching this video, I advise him to read my book before because there are too many details to fill up. Okay, then where does the Aryan come from? Everybody cannot come by sea. So majority of the people must have come by land route. They must have walked. So the next kingdom was the Iran. See, you cannot have a measured yardstick saying, I'm going to walk 50 kilometers a day. Sometimes you may take rest for 1 year or a century, and then you may have to move from that place. So when you do this sort of migration, you imbibe a lot of extraneous culture. So for example, when the Sumerians moved into Iran, they had to face the Parthians and the local Iranians. They formed which led to a new culture. What we now call the Aryans culture. It is only a culture. It is not a separate people. So they slowly moved and they reached the same place where one of their own branches came here. So in this book, I said the migration of Tamils took place in 2 stages. The first stage, they came to Crete as well as in the Indus basin. The second stage was in Tamil Nadu. So this is one of the reason why you find evidences of traces of Tamil or Dravidian culture in the Indus Valley region. So there is nothing to point out saying that Aryans came and invaded. There was no, so we don't have a memory in our literature to say there was an invasion.
That's what exactly I was about to ask.
Correct.
Because you have read the Sangam literature also, and the general perception that has been created academically and intellectually and of course politically.
Correct.
That as if Aryan and Dravidian are 2 racial categories.
Yes.
But if you go by the Sanskrit literature,
Correct.
it has more either geographical or the value-based qualitative connotation.
Correct.
What kind of interpretation do you find in Sangam literature?
So Sangam literature doesn't talk, first of all, there is no memory of any invasion or foreign people coming here, but it talks about Mauryas. It could have talked about Aryans or it could have talked about North Indian barbarian. It doesn't say so, but it has a very clear reference to the Mauryan and the Guptas. When Samudragupta came here, that is mentioned here in the literature. So Sangam literature, even though it is literature, it has a very rich historical evidences embedded into that.
Absolutely.
So when you look at this, there is absolutely no conflict between the north and the south. In fact, it was even revered. So if you take the other literature apart from the Sangam, the Tamil god, the foremost Tamil god is Lord Shiva. But his hometown is in Himalayas. And our Shiva Purana, it eulogizes Mount Kailash. So if our ancestors wanted to retain Shiva within Tamil Nadu, they could have chosen any other hills in Tamil Nadu to call it as an abode of Shiva. They didn't do so. Secondly, there is an 8th century inscription of the Pandyas. It is in a copper plate. It is a very famous copper plate inscription. You can see in Wikipedia, the actual photographs are given. It is called Velvikudi Cheppedu, copper plates of Velvikudi. It was by a king named Nedunjaliyan of 8th century. He says, my ancestor is Pururavasu.
Oh.
And he very clearly says it was he who gave us the symbol of fish as our emblem. A Pandyan Tamil king claiming a North Indian gentleman as his own ancestor. You look at Machapurana. Let me narrate that story in a couple of lines. One king by name Satyavrata, he goes to a river known as Kritamala, picks up some water in his hand. He sees a small tiny fish. The fish tells the king, please don't drop me, take me home. He takes in his kamandal, it fills the kamandal, he puts it in a bucket, fills the bucket, and then it becomes too big. Vishnu appears and says, I will there is going to be a huge flood. You build a ship and take all your near and dear. I will take you to a safe place. And where does he go? He comes to, as I mentioned, Tirunelveli. And then upon landing, Machapurana says, he is a Pandyan, Dravida Ishwar, which means Pandyan king. And Vishnu says, since you are the first human being, you are my Manu. You are the Swayambhuva Manu. He is the first Manu. So, and look at this beauty. A North Indian text claims that a Tamil king is their ancestor.
And that's why you see anywhere in India, without Kanyakumari and Kailasa, there is no story is complete.
Yes. And one more thing I want to tell you. Take this Skanda Purana, which is the biggest of, in terms of number of verses, it is the largest Purana.
Yes.
86,000 verses. And if you add the other prefaces and text, it becomes almost 100,000. The entire other Puranas are just merely 70,000 verses. This Skanda Purana has 3 parts. In the third portion, it talks about the abode of Lord Skanda or Kartikeya or what we call Muruga all over India. It starts from Afghanistan, goes all the way up to Cambodia, and then again from Kashmir to Tamil Nadu. The place of the temple location is given, the nearest river is given, or the pond is given, and they say how to reach it. It is like a modern day travel guide. And then they talk about what is the speciality of that place. How long can you spend there? Where can you get food? And this covers the whole of India. Even today, you see the most popular word in India, name in India is Kumar. Dilip Kumar, any Kumar. That is nothing but Kumara, that is Kartikeya. And that is Muruga. So there is nothing which separates us. It is all very recent history that people have spoiled the, or indoctrinated and spoiled the society to the extent that we say, somebody claims that, okay, I have nothing to do with the North and India is an oppressor. All this is nonsense.
But, unfortunately, what was started as a social justice movement and then eventually developed into Dravidianism and now talks about even Dravidistan, almost, thinking on a separatist line as if, it is something different from India, clubbing, all 4 languages of southern India together, which is not itself, kind of a homogeneous family.
Correct.
Because they have different influences of Sanskrit, give and take of if you see Malayalam or Kannada or for that matter even classical Tamil.
Correct.
So how do you see this evolution of so-called social justice movement to a Dravidian political movement and its impact on this political thinking?
See, the evolution of Dravidian social justice movement is a confluence of 3 diverse streams. One is global, the one is national, another one is local. See, globally, between 1900 to 1947, until our freedom, there were so many flashpoints all around the world. And the 2 world wars, the Crimean War or the Boer War, and flashpoints in the Middle East, Russo-Turkish War, Russo-Japanese War. Britain was heavily had an interest in all those wars because it wanted to maintain their hegemony. They felt that any disruption will rattle or disrupt their predatory pyramid because they were sitting on the apex of that pyramid, of predatory pyramid. So they came up with the Concord of Europe, saying that they wanted to maintain the balance. So they were trying to patch up wherever it is possible. And they wanted to have their own stooges supported. Then let us leave it at that at the global stage. Come to national stage. 1914, Mahatma Gandhiji lands in India. And the next year he starts the Champaran Satyagraha. He becomes a mass leader and that was his pinnacle of success. British were really rattled. And they are already they had a rude shock in 1857. They knew very well they could not afford any other, one more resistance of that nature and strength. And Gandhiji was again doing something which is totally new to India at that time. So they wanted to pacify. One suggestion was to give dominion status to India. But they were also a little worried because they tried this experiment with Australia, New Zealand, Canada and South Africa. South Africa split from the Commonwealth in 1910. So they wanted to give a watered down, diluted version of dominion status to India. They came up with the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. So that was
1919.
1919 that was implemented in 1919, but it was discussed even as early as 1918 and 1917. And Mr. Montagu was planning to visit India. So you know how the bureaucrats work. When a senior bureaucrat comes, they want to stage manage all their arrangement. They want only those people who would say the right phrases, utter the right statements to be presented. So they were looking for somebody who would receive Montagu in a very favorable manner. And then they found this motley group of people who were anti-Brahminical. So they organized them into the South Indian Liberal Federation, which is the genesis of the Dravidian party. This organization ran a magazine called Justice. So that the name of the magazine stuck to the party as a
Justice
moniker.
Party.
So they called it Justice Party. Who are the founders of the Justice Party? Big time contractors. The main contractor was Mr. Tyagaraja Shetty, who supplied grains to the British cantonment and the British army, or PWD contractors, or people who were railway contractors. So who benefited out of the British government. But they had a grudge against the Brahmins who were occupying the upper echelons of judiciary or revenue department. So particularly here there is a community called the Mudaliyars in northern Tamil Nadu in Chennai. So the fight was between the Brahmins and the Mudaliyars. The rest of the community, the 99% of Tamil Nadu did not participate in this rivalry between these two communities. It was a rivalry.
British actually took benefit of it.
Exactly. The British used them as this. And why would otherwise Annie Besant would become the patron of this organization? Even though she had her own home rule, she was the mentor for these people. So you connect the dots. Why would British Raj, Annie Besant and extraneous forces would support the South Indian Liberation or the Justice Party? So this is the genesis of Justice Party. Their aim was to be loyal to the British and try to gain some benefit out of them by dislodging the Brahmins from the upper echelon. This was their objective. This was written down. But they cannot go to the public saying that we wanted to be a supporter of the British Raj. So they wanted a narration. That narration is anti-Brahmin narration. And people didn't look at it. For example, I will give you a fact. The Madras presidency that time, the population was about 600 million, 6 crores. Tamil Nadu, Andhra put together. People who are eligible to vote was only 400,000. People who actually voted was less than 150,000. So you cannot call it a representative government which was representing the aspirations of the people. This was a rich man's club. One mistake did by the Congress was that when this Montagu-Chelmsford reforms was introduced and diarchy was introduced, the elections were conducted in 1920.
Right.
Congress refused to participate because they objected to diarchy. Whereas in the north, Chittaranjan Das found the Swaraj party within the Congress.
And by 1923, they were already part of the provincial government.
Yes, so he participated in the elections and he said, see...
For that matter, even Motilal Nehru was...
Exactly. So their argument was, see, let us take whatever opportunity comes at us now. See, let us not refuse any opportunity. Let us gain some... After all, we are going to do good to our own people. We are not going to benefit out of this. Whereas in Tamil Nadu, since Congress did not participate, this motley crowd came to power because there was no other competitor. Whenever there was an opposition, the Justice Party failed miserably. So they formed the party.
But this anti-Brahminism to anti-Hindu to anti-India. How did this journey?
There is one more step here. Dravidianism.
Dravidian.
Before becoming
that is separatism. that.
So the people who were in the thick of this movement, they were mostly non-Tamil people, except for a few, the Chettiars, Tyagaraja Chettiar, Annamalai Chettiar. Otherwise, they were the Raja of Panagal, Boppili Raja. They were all feudal lords from Andhra Pradesh. So they had to justify themselves. So they cannot say that we are working for the welfare of Tamil people. So they have to coin a word which includes them also. So then they coined the word, they took it out of the Robert Caldwell's book, the comparative study of the Dravidian grammar of the Dravidian languages. So they found this word Dravidian.
Where all the southern
They
languages
wanted to group all the
together.
southern languages. Yes, it was grouped by Robert Caldwell. But if you look at our literature, there is no mention of such things. The term Dravidian, it is used in Tamil literature in only one occasion, in a collection of songs written by one saint called Thayumanavar, who was a contemporary of Aurangzeb. So in his poem, the word Dravida is mentioned only once, and it means Tamil language. That's all. Nothing else. No racial connotation, no geographical connotation, no inclusion of all the other sister languages, nothing. So this was a fraud committed on
And
Tamil
what about
people.
the term Aryan? Arya
Oh my God, there is copious mention of the Aryan in our literature. And particularly the Sangam literature does not talk about any invasion, but it talks about Aryan people. So they had a knowledge of people. Our grammar, Tolkappiyam, it talks about Sanskrit. It says, you will be surprised, there is a chapter on words. What are the right words to use? So it says first it should be a Tamil word. If not, it should be a Sanskrit word. If not, it could be a word from any other country. So Tamil chol, Vadasol, which is Sanskrit, North Indian word, Tisai chol. Tisai means from all directions. You could take it from any other country within India. When I say country, because it was not outside India. So we had a very good respect for Sanskrit. Our Bhakti literature praises Vedas, praises Sanskrit, and they say these are all the two sides of the same coin. And in fact, there is one verse by Appar. He is a saint from the 7th century. He is the contemporary of Mahendra Pallava. He says, Sanskrit and Tamil came from the same Damaru of Lord Shiva. One side when he used its Damaru, from the one side Tamil came out. And see, let us forget about the story and the mythology, but let us look at the spirit of that story. The spirit says it is the same.
It was never Sanskrit versus Tamil.
There is nothing versus. See, Sanskrit, in my opinion, it was the language of the elite. Let me ask you a question. Suppose a king from Tamil Nadu wants to write a letter to a king in Kalinga. In what language would he have written? He would not have written in Tamil or in the Orissa language, Oriya. It would have been Sanskrit. So Sanskrit was a lingua franca of India, like Latin during the Middle Ages. Every country had their own native language, but they used Latin in the communication between the elites. Why did Newton write his book in Latin, even though he was an English gentleman? Because he wanted the other scientists in Europe to understand or criticize.
And then get that kind of
Exactly, get a
acceptance.
feedback. So the Sanskrit was acting as the similar connection between one state or one region of India to the other. If you go to Indonesia, most of the inscriptions are in Tamil and Sanskrit or mixture of both.